We haven't talked about Warren Buffett's annual shareholder letter yet.
Well, it only came out a couple of days ago. It was a great letter. It didn't make us exactly running to the microphones to talk about it.
But there is a younger me and a younger you that we would have wrote something or we would have recorded something like that day. So we've matured, we've aged, and we've sat with it a little bit. And I think we've come to agree that there were three things that really stood out as maybe the most important takeaways from Buffett's letter.
There was a lot in there, but if you try to distill it down and let yourself think about it for a couple days instead of running to the microphones as quick as possible, I think we can distill it down to these three core things.
All right, let's talk about those three things. But before we do, we have a great partnership with the Motley Fool. The Motley Fool sponsors this video. If you're looking for more great stock ideas, you should go to our special link. It's fool.com/unscripted. If you go to fool.com/unscripted, you can get access to the Motley Fool's 10 best stocks to buy right now. I'm going to make Tyler tell me whether he thinks Berkshire's a buy right now, too, at the end of the video here. Buffett's letter really is, I think, must read for any investor who's a fundamentals-based long-term investor. Buffett's insights and wisdom are useful, even if maybe a little bit repetitious over the years. Sometimes we just need regular reminders of some of those things. So what's the first thing that stood out to you as maybe the biggest takeaway, maybe the most important thing from this annual letter?
Here's the one thing, and it was just kind of a contrast and a refreshing candor that I wish we got from a lot of leaders of companies. Where basically he came out and said, "Look, we've made mistakes plenty of times. I've even mentioned it in these letters, and it's a thing that other companies just don't do. There's so many other companies that throughout their entire existence, all they do is tell you how awesome things are. Everything's the best, everything's awesome, and everything's perfect all the time. Very rarely do you see them be like, yeah, we screwed that up, and we owe you, we owe it to you to do better." The only other letter that I think he said he read was one from Amazon 4 years ago where they said that maybe this wasn't the best decision. It goes to show if somebody's been doing it as long and as successful as Warren Buffett has been doing it, and yet he's willing to admit his mistakes, it makes you wonder why others aren't taking their cue and just being more forthright with everyone about what's working, what isn't.
I think sometimes in our cynical ways, when we think about somebody like Buffett, it's like, yeah, he's in his mid 90s now. He's reached the age of no, you know what's to give anymore. But this isn't new for Buffett. For decades, Buffett has been willing to be candid about decisions he made in his annual letter. And that humility, I don't think is forced. The lesson for me about it is it's a reminder that mistakes they're a feature of investing. One of the things that he highlighted in prior years was investing in ConocoPhillips and how he did it when oil was $120 a barrel and picked a terrible time to invest in an oil major. And it went terribly for the company.
It was only a couple of letters ago, he talked about the missteps in the Kraft Heinz merger,
Yep, right.
working with the capital partners that they did to try to merge these consumer food giants into something and wring out efficiencies that just never materialized.
It's not just the stock investments that he highlights. In this letter, he frankly said that some of the subsidiaries, the wholly owned subsidiaries that Berkshire bought, they probably should not have bought, that it was probably a mistake. The key, again, the takeaway here is that, to me, it's a feature of investing that you're going to make bad decisions. You're going to make mistakes along the way, but it's the very few really good decisions that you make along the way, make those bad decisions irrelevant. The decision to buy Geico, to buy BNSF Railways, and the amount of cash flow those businesses have generated is in excess of the price the company paid to buy them. The decision to expand his circle of competence and to buy Apple because of his ability to recognize the moat of a brand with Apple. That's been the most profitable investment Berkshire has ever made. So a few really good decisions more than erase those mistakes, and accepting and have the humility to know that mistakes are going to happen. That regular reminder he gives us of that is pretty good. Okay, what's the next thing really stands out?
There's always the zingers, the one-liners, but something that is just a hearkening back to things that we long for as investors was just the sense that he writes like he works for you. As the shareholder of the company, the CEO, works for you. And it's a kind of a forgotten thing, and something that I do greatly appreciate it when I read these letters, that he treats it as such, as a steward of us, the shareholders, rather than, I think, the common attitude that we see so often these days in the world of investing, where we have rock star founder CEOs that take on these larger than life personalities or followings among investors, a little bit of hero worship that changes the dynamic between what a CEO is. I can see it in the back of Jason's bookshelf there, and it's right over on my shoulder over here is both of our versions of the intelligent investor. And it's something
Mhm.
that Benjamin Graham spoke of a lot
Those that
when he
don't
wrote
know,
his
was Charlie Munger's earliest, maybe most important initial mentor in the investing world before Charlie Munger.
perhaps some of the lessons are a little stale in there, but the one that never changes is he constantly reminds anyone who reads this is as the investor, as a long-term investor, where you plan to hold this business for a long time, management works for you. They are
Yeah.
your employees, and you should treat that relationship with the seriousness and the studiousness that it requires, as well as management should treat it in that way as well. Buffett still does. I don't think there's a lot out there that still do.
This is the line that really stood out to me. Our goal is to communicate with you in a manner that we would wish you to use if our positions were reversed. That is, if you were Berkshire CEO while I and my family were passive investors trusting you with our savings. Again, Buffett's been consistent with that going back to his days running a partnership. And I think running a partnership where he literally knew personally the people whose money he was managing heavily influenced the way he thinks about shareholders in these companies as well. Reminds me of a story I heard from another legendary investor, one that no longer with us, T. Boone Pickens, once told me a story about a meeting between some executives with a board member where they were asking the board to increase the dividend, and the board member's response was something along the lines of, why in the hell would we give more money to a bunch of people that we don't even know? Very different way of thinking about it from Buffett. I certainly look for that mentality in the companies that I follow. All right, we have one more. We're projecting a little bit here, Tyler, with our last one, but I think it's the one that may be the most foreshadowing of what could be happening with Berkshire, maybe sooner rather than later.
There was some pretty frank statements about his age and Greg Abel's role as the future CEO in this company, and he will probably be writing these missives or letters in the sooner than later future age.
At 94, it won't be long before Greg Abel replaces me at CEO, and we'll be writing the annual letters. So again, maybe we're projecting, but I think this has been the most direct that Buffett has been in reminding us that his time as CEO is probably shorter than maybe we want to think.
I mean, he's made jokes about it for years about,
Yeah.
hey, we're still here. We're still
We've
here.
been
I
getting
mean,
these
him and
questions since the 90s.
it's always been kind of a quib and a joke, and this one seemed a little bit more frank and serious than the previous iterations of that.
Yeah, and I can't help but wonder if maybe a little bit of Buffett's decision to include that little quip was the thing that followed it. And that was his kind of a eulogy he wrote to Pete Leigel, who was the founder and CEO of Forest River, the subsidiary that manufactures RVs, who just recently died at the age of 80. But he ran Forest River for 25 or so years after Berkshire acquired it and was involved in it pretty much up until his death. So what do you think? Do you think this is Buffett telling us that maybe this May, early May, when Berkshire has its annual meeting, it's going to be a little shorter than normal? Maybe Buffett might have something to tell us?
We've kind of been dancing around this for a while, and certainly why I think you and I are trying to make our pilgrimage to Omaha this year. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but we can always try to read between the lines.
That's right. I think my take from that is maybe the most important take. And it's something that, to mention another legendary investor, Peter Lynch, is try to own companies that any idiot can run, because eventually any idiot will run it. And while I like to think that Greg Abel is well-positioned and is incredibly smart and a likely very talented leader, and we've seen other great leaders come into Berkshire and do more things in the past 15 years or so, I think investors that look at Berkshire should approach it with the idea of, if you want to own this business for the long term, you're going to own it longer than Warren Buffett is going to be running it. So you have to be mindful that that is part of the deal when you buy Berkshire stock now, or you hold Berkshire stock now, is that if you're fortunate, you will continue to own it after Buffett is no longer running the company.
It's something that we have talked about with just about any company now, and why management and why who's in charge, who could be in charge in the future, and why we want management incented ways to make it work for us is because it's more than just the rock star CEOs. It's more than that. It can last for multiple management teams, your investment in any company. And so it requires not just a deft hand, but also sometimes a much more durable business that can withstand some of the less than ideal management teams that may run it.
Okay, with that in mind, Berkshire Hathaway, trillion-dollar company now, stock is within spitting distance of all-time highs. Are you buying Berkshire at these prices or just holding the shares that you have? How are you thinking about bought stock.
In my typical glacial decision-making process when it comes to buying stocks, I'm still holding. I don't think even with the transition to Greg Abel, plan to do anything other than hold those shares for a long time. As far as buying new shares, I might just sit on my cash for a little while longer and see what happens.